Struggling to keep customers coming back? Wondering how to turn retention into real revenue? Whether you are just starting out or a seasoned business pro, join us to explore AI-driven innovations, churn prevention strategies, and customer success tactics that actually work. Welcome to Retain and Gain. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Retain and Gain. I am Michaela Carpenter, and today I have Joe Di Grande with us, and we are going to be talking about every CRO's favorite topic, and that's renewals. Because what can bring you better revenue than renewals, right? Hi Joe, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Joe, how did you even get into this topic? What drives you to talk about renewals and how to optimize renewals?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the biggest thing is, and to give you kind of a little background on me, right now I lead my own consultancy firm, focusing on automating tech touch, digital CS. And I'm a big believer in a lot of people forget that CS should be really a revenue function at the end of the day, right? You're trying to prove value to your customers to make sure that they renew, right? That's the end goal, making sure they stay with you, they're getting value, and that's what keeps the lights on. But really where this all started was probably, I want to say, anywhere between 8 to 10 years ago when I was managing my own book of accounts as a CSM. First, it was an onboarding rep, so focusing on implementation, then driving value throughout the relationship, and then eventually an account manager as well, then managing all three pieces. And at the time, I had my own book and I used tools like SalesLoft, Salesforce, and to be honest, I was just scrappy. I had a bunch of other side hustles myself, and I'm like, I got to figure out a way where I could really amp this up so I get more time back as a CSM in my day. Like, all right, I want to focus on managing more accounts. Oh yeah. So it's like, hey, why let someone else tell me? I'm not on an hourly clock here. So at any rate, I was always the guinea pig. So I used tools to kind of do it on my own. And then eventually the business expanded. They were focusing on developing essentially intentionally a long tail approach. So lowering their pricing to focus on smaller companies and to make it more, digestible for them so they could purchase. And it exploded. It did exceptionally well.
Nice.
And it was great, but you have a new problem, right? The new problem being, hey, how do we make sure that they're supported and that we get them to renew long term? At any rate, they nominated me, this is probably back in 2017, and they said, hey, we think you're a good fit for doing this. You use all these tools already. We want to figure out a way to essentially, the first step was the renewals. That was core. Eventually it was onboarding and throughout the life cycle, but we need to figure out a way to automate the renewals. I said, no problem. I'll take a shot at it. And it started with a segment of around 60 to 63 accounts. And they're typically smaller businesses, lower ARR, right? And that's a good test segment to start with. Always. I'm a big believer in it. I think a lot of people could just launch automation with bigger companies. And it's like, if you have some long tail customers, I think those are the best ones to kind of experiment with because it's a little lower risk. But this was a give me. It was perfect for it. And it actually performed better than people at the time. This is almost now thinking back almost 10 years ago. And I was hooked. I was like, all right, let's figure this out. How can I turn this into a role? And I transitioned to sales operations and eventually it was like RevOps long term. And we build out this entire, when we say the renewal cycle, it's not just like, hey, it's time to renew, right? There was a lot of thought that went into it. Like, hey, how should we be having baked in increase for a particular segment of account, right? Who are the actual people that are reaching out? Is it just the account manager? Is there essentially senior leadership that's automated that's going out to those customers? And it did so well in addition to hey, we not eliminated it, we probably reprioritized, some CSMs to focus on bigger opportunity accounts. And that would have been around 10 CSMs at that time that were now focused on higher ARR. Which is
not a small number.
Not a small number at all. If you're talking a CRO and a CFO's dream, right? You're thinking the average salary of a CSM could range anywhere between 60 to 100 or upwards of $100,000. Times that by 8 to 10 people, you could save a lot of revenue. And then, of course, more importantly, allocate those resources to a higher impact, project or account book and so on. But it blew up to around 700 customers up until I left. And customers meaning, companies itself. I mean, we're talking thousands of users. But, and honestly, like from the tool standpoint, I mean, we've done it with, we actually didn't even use CSPs at that time. We were leveraging Salesforce. We were using EMARKETER.
Yeah, I'm surprised you said 10 years ago. And I feel like back then, like, like the term customer success hardly existed.
Oh.
It was like key account management, relationship management, like post-sales operations, like,
I'll never forget too when I was in a junior stage, right? I asked a lot of questions, which is great. I encourage anybody in the space, ask a ton of questions. Don't be scared to. But I asked my manager at one point, or the leader of the department. I sat right next to him, and poor guy, I loaded him with questions. And I said, when we had the change in the team, we started to change it to customer success managers. It's like, hey, why customer success? I'm like, why not client success? Or where did the name come from? Now, forget it. Today, it's like the industry standard term.
Yeah, it is.
But at the time, I was just like, I don't know. Like, where is this going with this? And then obviously, here we are today. Customer success is just a mainstream term and even has now replaced the term like account management, and so on. So, yeah, a lot has changed. But at that time, there were a lot of tools in the space. I think they were early on. I think our organization was a little bit different too. I think we were pretty scrappy. We had a full, team for Salesforce, right? I think that's really crucial, right? I think a lot of people get scared with tools like Salesforce, and it's true, right?
Oh, definitely. And all the data that comes with it and all the integrations and everything, that's a big scarecrow.
It 100%. And also too, I think it's also, there's a big learning curve, right? You need to understand their own coding language and so on. And thankfully, we had the resources to build that out. I think if we didn't have that at the time, we probably would have opted for like a gain site or something. But we were able to do a lot of stuff in-house and leverage sales engagement platforms and marketing technology on our own. So it was fun. It was fun building, that's for sure. And seeing how the cool thing is seeing how people react to the automation. I think that's something that's pretty addictive, especially from the renewal standpoint. When you're negotiating and things of that nature.
So what I'm really intrigued by is that you said, you built all of this in other tools. And I feel like when it comes to renewals, a lot of companies or just a lot of leaders, it doesn't matter if you are in SaaS or if you're in other organization, if you have renewals, a lot of people just kind of rely on the fact that, if the customer is not necessarily unhappy, they are just going to renew and they are waiting until the renewal and then they are up for a big surprise, right?
Oh, yeah.
So in your experience, how do you get that foot in the door? Or how do you find out without the specific CSP tools or tools like we have nowadays, all these AI that can monitor your health and suggest the action? How did you back then look into that? How did you make an estimation? Is this customer going to renew or are they not going to renew?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And it's tough, right? Like, we had to be pretty scrappy of how we predicted. And I did a whole change up. And again, like my mind's going to be a little bit foggy on the specifics. But what we did was like, in terms of how the company looked at like, your deal stages or opportunity stages in Salesforce, scrapped. We created my own process. And what we did was we actually looked at, it was a blend of like, hey, like when's the last time they've logged in, right? And in addition to that, a couple other things too, like if they had said, if there's a certain number of users they want it registered to make sure they hit like their cap, right? Like if they were unlimited, maybe we had like a benchmark, but if they purchased like an allocated amount of seats of let's say 10 logins, right? Obviously we want to make sure those are all filled. So those were some basic metrics there. And then the last thing, which I thought was extremely valuable, and this kind of goes back to the sales hat, is when we had inbound activity. When we had a lot of like, again, this goes back to like how we tracked in Salesforce, and we had a very good, I believe, a good implementation of it at that time. We looked at inbound activity and said, okay, if they're consistently negotiating for one, and we would reach out anywhere between 120 to 90 days in advance, for the renewal. And then we had other touch points on
That's a good time frame.
Great time frame. I'm even thinking now 90 is even a little on the slower side now, but there's still other touch points baked in between the entire account lifecycle that you have to take into consideration. But what we looked at was like, all right, hey, when's the last time we've actually gotten an inbound activity from them? When did they reach out to us? When did they respond? And if we didn't have that, especially within 30 days of renewal or 90 days of renewal, all right, there's some churn risk.
There's a problem.
Oh yeah. And it got so good that we were on the money on that. That's when we baked it into our deal stages or opportunity stages to really predict like, oh, okay, well, this is potentially at risk of churn. And then we ended up creating our own score and so on. And there was a lot more to it. But that I would say was a pretty good indication, right? Like you want to make sure it's almost similar to if you've heard this, especially on like the support side and how it blends into CS. If you have a customer that is actually not writing into support and submitting, tech tickets, whatever, it's almost like a red flag there as well because they're not using the platform. They're not running into bugs. They're not running into issues on how to do X, Y, Z. So that's almost initially a red flag. So it's almost similar to that, logic as well.
I think that a lot of product managers would argue and tell you that that's the ideal customer.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they'll be, but hey, listen, they'll be out of a job.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, so when it comes to, all these touch points and the automation, like what's the baseline for you? I saw on your LinkedIn, you talk a lot about data and data readiness and how to have like good data to make it all happen.
100%. And that's kind of like my bread and butter and like what I do with my clients, is really just understanding their readiness to do, tech touch, digital CS, scaled CS. Because at the end of the day, there's still an element of automation or even an element of reporting, right? Like if you're basing any sort of business decision on your reporting and the data isn't right to a certain degree, right? Like right is debatable, right? But the point is, you can't do much. So you have to start with the basics. You have to start and say like, hey, what is my ultimate goal? When it comes to, at a macro to micro level, at a micro level, it's like, all right, how do I manage the account lifecycle? How do I replicate a CSM or an account manager onboarding rep and do so in a way of let's take a look at what the process is currently. How do I 10x it in terms of scale? And you do that based on data. So what are those touch points to do it? I'm always a big believer in dates. Dates are your best friend when first starting out because you could kind of work backwards or forward. If you have a contract start date, you could say like, all right, however many days from the start date.
This is exactly how I operate.
Exactly.
I love
and
it.
It's perfect. I mean, because at the end of the day, like most contracts are a year, right? Obviously, we could be blessed with multi-year agreements, but that's not always the case.
Common. Yeah,
it's not that common. So especially now with the economy and so on. So, okay, great. Like we have the start date, we have the end date. Let's work backwards from there and let's analyze what was working with our customers currently at a high touch model, a regular enterprise model, whatever that might be. And let's see how we could replicate it and based on those different stages of what certain things should be happening. So that's number one. Obviously, there comes down to also segmentation that's at the account level. Then you have the contact level, right? If you're not in a place where you could trust your data of like from where it's coming from on the product, right? At a baseline, it kind of starts with the sales process initially and identifying essentially like account roles, right? Like who is the decision maker? Who's actually like an executive sponsor, someone that's a big fan of it. They might not be, they might be either a VP, SVP, C-level executive, but they're not the ultimate decision maker. They're just there because they're just, such big fans of the product. But you have all those roles. Typically, they come up in the sales process. But if you're labeling them, make them required during that sales process, you'll have that data. So that's another touch point or another data value that you could leverage as well. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question there because, like you say that, yes, this needs to be done during the sales process, etc. But how do you motivate salespeople? How do you show them that there is actually value in for them to have the data that is corresponding with the truth?
So I've dealt with this almost every organization I've been with, right? It definitely comes down to, it starts from the top, right? It's obviously establishing that.
It always does.
It starts with that relationship with whoever's managing that particular team. That's number one. But number two, when we talk about rev ops or customer success ops, whatever it might be, there still has to be an element of friction good friction, right? Like obviously like friction, if you're trying to go to a landing page to get an ebook, that's an element of friction. You have to enter your name, your title.
Yeah.
Same thing kind of applies here. In this world, you're going to want to put some rules in place in your CRM, your CSP, whatever that might be. So, and bake it into their process. So let's say, I'll give you an example. They can't move to a particular deal stage or opportunity stage, that salesperson, until they mark at least, one decision maker or a decision maker and an influencer or whatever that might be. Obviously, you're going to have to do a little bit of lifting in terms of, hey, how do I track this in order for Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever your CRM is or CSP in order to go in, to track it. But there are ways to make it required to prevent and create that little bit of friction so that way we could track the right data. But I think required fields is so, so important. And that goes the same for customer success managers as well. I've seen that with implementation, right? Sometimes companies will bake in implementation, into customer success, and they might be this is another way. They might be comped on like, hey, how successful or how quickly they saw time to value. Great.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a great one. But now, like, are they entering the right data to track it? Right? Oh, well, if you don't enter the right data, you're not incentivized to get your commission or whatever it might be. And that could work same thing on the sales side too. So those are a couple ways I would say to wrap it up. It's like, it's required fields, obviously the leadership component, developing that relationship and getting that buy-in, and then seeing how to essentially train your employees to be incentivized, right? For the good behavior. But yeah.
So when we circle back to the renewals, and of course, like it needs to be based on data, but if there is a company that is building automated renewals for the first time,
yep,
what would you say that is crucial touch point or touch points that need to be there regardless if you're a software company, if you're not a software company, but that those kind of touch points should not be missing in the renewal process?
It's a very good question. I would say it's coming from, and any outreach, by the way, should look like it's coming from your CSM. I think we're at that point now where the market has pretty much identified that's going to be the most successful. In the past, maybe like 6-7 years ago, where it was like this debate of like, should it be coming from marketing? Should it look like a newsletter or what have you? It should always look like it's coming from a person, right? Because they're trying to establish that relationship as it is. They don't want to seem like they're just in a catch-all. But that initial touch point from your CSM to your main point of contact is number one. That's the first step, right? The second point is trying to understand your strategy. I do believe that there should be an element of where a senior leader should come into play. I've seen this been very successful with my clients where, you have, and it might not even have to be the actual email of that senior leader. It could be like another inbox, so that way it doesn't over inundate that leader and someone else can manage it. But having someone, on the leadership level come and reach out to a client just to make sure that they feel heard and they feel supported, to understand whether they're just reaching out to say, hey, did you get the renewal offer? Do you have any questions? Or I'm here if you need anything specific, let me know how so-and-so, is doing, your customer success manager. I'm here to, receive that feedback and just intake that information. I would say those are two core ones. And I mean, the last is obviously notifying whether they're going to expire or not, right? So like if you're dealing with a company that has a ton of users, right? Like, hey, are they aware that access is expiring, right? Maybe we haven't heard from them. You might annoy that particular account by, let's say, messaging them, right? It's inevitable, but at the end of the day, your job's on the line. You need to make sure you hit your numbers. I think it's all about how you massage the messaging to a certain degree and also the response. But 9 times out of 10, either you're going to get like crickets or you're going to find another person that has been an advocate maybe you weren't even aware of and be like, hey, I'll have my own department take this on. Let's have a quick call so we don't disturb access amongst those users. And those I would say are some key touch points you should have as a baseline. Was that 3 that I rattled off? And I think that also all of them you could do, they're very low lift. I think you could pretty much do almost all of them based on just date fields, depending on how scrappy you want to be.
And so you mentioned this executive outreach, that like executives in some cases like should even reach out to the customers. So you show them that importance of their business to your company. But what do you do in cases where you really have a big portfolio of very low annual value contracts, or if you really have a big segment of customers that might have like just like one product or one license? Like, how do you reach out to them?
So yeah, that's a good question. In terms of the how, it's definitely automation, right? I think it's having a scalable way of doing that initial outreach is going to be key. At a scale, you could use marketing automation platforms, you can use customer success platforms, you can use sales engagement platforms, depending. You take your pick. As far as actually like how to navigate that, because it is, let's say, a senior leader reaching out to low ARR and also that volume, I think the key is also like the messaging and making sure you massage it in a way where it may not always facilitate a response, right? If you are genuinely looking for a response, making sure you have a way of intaking it, right? Like, use it in a survey, right? That's going to be the most scalable. If it's just a matter of like, hey, did you get the renewal offer? Great. I mean, that's not going to be, much there. I think it's really the tricky part, right, is like where they actually have to step in. But you could also have that, whether it's like a pooled CS team, scaled CS team, whatever, have kind of like a designated person that manages that inbox. Be like, oh, okay, hey, they responded to so-and-so. Let's forward it to the appropriate manager. That customer success manager goes and responds and be like, hey, I noticed you responded to senior leaders outreach. I'm happy to support you and, reach an agreement, whatever that might be. And that's another way. So it's, again, it could look like it's coming from that particular senior leader, but there's behind the scenes, there's someone managing that inbox, kind of similar to marketing at the end of the day. Marketing does very similar strategies as well. Like the senior leader will look like maybe they're sending a very unique one-off newsletter, but it really behind the scenes marketing is actually facilitating like where that goes.
And so another thing when it comes to renewals, which I think really creates tension in a lot of companies, is that you have this great, beautiful process, right? You automate things, and then it's a question of like, oh, but you're stealing business from sales. Or where does sales end and customer success begins? Or where do you find that balance? In your experience, what do you think is that golden ratio when it comes to renewals?
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I think it boils down to like understanding one. Unfortunately, you have to kind of get into the politics and like what, each leader's goal is, right? Like how the teams are segmented too. Like I have seen full cycle reps manage upsell opportunity as well as, actual finding new business. So I think it's just kind of bringing, essentially have a round table, right? I think having those senior leaders brought into a room and then have a champion within each of those teams, like a champion CSM, a champion sales rep from, whatever, if there's particular segments, keep that in mind too. But kind of having that alignment first. I don't think there is like I don't think you can wave like a magic wand, so to speak, to just, figure that out. Do I think you can automate upsell, even like whether that's a particular product or just percentage of increases or even multi-years? 100%. You can do it. The responsibility, that comes down to like a leadership. Where do they step in and who's responsible for what? I think also too, it's another opportunity, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be CS. It can be sales, and sales can automate those touch points just the same. And, even whether it's automate or just automating the identification of before sending such touch points. I know that's sometimes you get pushback too from people, right? They want a little bit of element of control.
Yeah.
But, I digress.
And so do you think it works better if one person is responsible for that whole cycle? Or do you think that in general, it works better if it's kind of divided?
Being in the shoes of both, this is a personal opinion more than anything else. I believe they should be divided. What I think should be brought together is where you have, so like when we say divided, I think new business should stick to new business, right? Because there's a lot of work that's involved in new business, right? You potentially have to, put a good brand up for yourself, right? As looking at like a leader in
That's
the
true.
space, right? You have to market yourself as a salesperson, right? Stand out amongst your own team. It's hyper competitive in order to generate pipeline. Then also be efficient in getting responding to inbound inquiries, closing them, demos, so on and so forth. You potentially even have to navigate working with other like a solutions engineer, sales engineer to do a demo or a proof of concept. That's a lot of work. But again, not every product's the same. But again, that's just my opinion. I think they should just focus on new biz. Now, for this there's the debate on customer success managers, being responsible for renewals and upsell or not, and they're just focusing on proving value. In my opinion, I believe that they should be I would say 80% of the time they should be responsible for the renewal, the upsell, and then proving that value. At the end of the day, proving value is selling, right? It's making sure that they have the use cases, they understand the value. And also too, if you're also like just hitting roadblocks constantly, then you have to also start to question, are they the right fit? Like, is that customer right fit? Yeah. So, but on the flip side, there are solutions out there that I've seen that are highly technical. And that's where you just need, hey, that CSM should be strictly technical or like a technical account manager. And then there's someone that's just focused on the relationship, the sell, and so on. But it's definitely having that CSM be responsible, or at least having that sales mindset is going to be key for them to prove value. And it's kind of my stance on that.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you think there is anything that we forgot to mention when it comes to renewals, or did we manage to, like, in a grand scheme, cover it all?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of renewals, to kind of like the key takeaway here is don't overthink it. I'd say take a look start with your goal, number one, right? Figure out what you're trying to achieve, right? And taking a step back too, sometimes it's not gross revenue retention or net revenue retention. Maybe it goes back to my example. Hey, we need those numbers to stay flat, but we need less people managing it. We need 1 versus 10.
Yeah.
That's a KPI within itself, a different one that doesn't come up as often, or it's just doesn't get enough focus, but that's key. And then focus on what those outcomes are. Great. Now, what's taking the most time? What's taking the most time for that person or that rep in order to manage those customers? Whatever's taking the most time or whatever's the most urgent. In my example, it was the renewals, and they were coming up within less than 6 months. That was the number one priority. And then just focus on the basics, right? Like, what data do you have? Can you trust it, right? I think we didn't talk about even like auditing data. I mean, auditing data is a whole nother conversation, but like the basics I think we could leave people with is like, hey, who's updating it? Is it a system? Or is it a person? And then like, what percentage of that, based on who you're reaching out to, is it accurate, right? You might have to do a little auditing. Are there any blank values, things of that nature? And then start small. Start like a small test segment of accounts to see how it goes. Create fake accounts. I've done this a number of times as well, where it's like, all right, I create a fake account. I plug in some blank, some values that are relevant to see if it triggers. Great, everything working. Sometimes you'll catch errors. It still happens to me. I've been doing this time and time again. You never know how things are going to react, and also too, with so many different platforms, they make UI changes, product changes, run into their own bugs. Oh yeah. So, but yeah,
you have a change in connection and it's all messed up.
Oh yeah. 100%. But yeah, I'd say it's the best way to put it though. I think it's start small, focus on the goal. You could be tool agnostic. Tools are great. I think focusing on the strategy first and understanding what the goal is going to be key. And then, make a case and show that it works. And then, you could kind of expand, build out your tech stack and so on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joe. Some great inputs. And if somebody wanted to continue this conversation, where could my listeners find you?
Yeah, no, 100%. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Joe Di Grande on LinkedIn from Joe Does Tech Touch. Also, I'm launching a newsletter. I'm sure probably put a link in the description, as well as a podcast for called Customer Unsuccess. We're talking about automation and failed plays. I got plenty of stories on that, but it's really to give the audience and the listeners, some guidance and how to avoid from whether it's my mistakes or the guest's mistakes on the show, what the learning lessons, that you could take away from it. So you can find me in all those different places, and more than happy for a coffee chat. Feel free, schedule some time.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And I hope we will talk soon again. Thanks, guys.
Same here. Thanks for
Bye,
everyone.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Retain and Gain. Stay tuned for more insights and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.